In this geopolitical deep dive, we use John Mearsheimer's offensive realism to explain how China has reached a level of power the United States never expected, and cannot easily contain. This multi-part analysis explores how China quietly broke the US-led unipolar order built after 1991, why American strategy helped build China's industrial and technological power, how China became the world's only full-spectrum manufacturing superpower, why US alliances, sanctions, and export controls are no longer enough, how the military balance in the Western Pacific has shifted against Washington, what a China-centered Asia looks like, even without a war, and how the international system is sliding into multipolarity with all the instability that brings. If you want to understand the next 50 years of global power politics, this video is essential. This is Dr. Dan's channel where we break down world politics through the lens of realism, power, interests, and the hard limits of strategy. For the first time in 80 years, the United States is facing a rival it cannot intimidate, isolate, or contain. And the world order built after 1991 is collapsing under its weight. The competitor America built. If you look carefully at the international system today, you'll notice something extraordinary and deeply uncomfortable for Washington. China has reached a level of power the United States never expected and, frankly, never prepared for. For the first time since the end of the Cold War, the US is facing a peer competitor with the economic power, the industrial base, and the geopolitical ambition to rewrite global rules, not just follow them. And here's the truth policymakers in Washington rarely say aloud. The United States has no clean, cost-free response to this challenge. Not militarily, not economically, not diplomatically. The underlying problem is structural. The unipolar order the US built after 1991 was designed for a world where no rival could ever catch up, where American primacy was self-reinforcing and permanent. China did the one thing that order was not designed to handle. It grew too fast, too powerful, and too strategically disciplined. This is where realism, particularly John Mearsheimer's offensive realism, becomes unavoidable. In international politics, power is what matters. Everything else, ideology, speeches, human rights, promises of cooperation, is secondary. And today, China has the economic and military foundations to become not just a regional hegemon, but potentially the most powerful state on the planet. Washington recognizes this. Recognition, however, does not automatically produce a solution. That's the problem. In this video, we're going to walk through 1. How China broke the system the US thought it controlled. 2. How China cornered the United States economically and militarily. 3. Why US strategy is failing, from sanctions to alliances. 4. And what happens next as Asia gravitates around Beijing and the world moves into a multipolar age. How China broke the system. For decades, American elites believed they had found the formula for permanent dominance. The idea was simple. Integrate China into the global economy. Trade and prosperity will create a middle class. That middle class will demand liberal democracy. China will become a responsible stakeholder in a US-led order. This was engagement theory. Instead of producing a compliant partner, that strategy produced something else. The world's manufacturing superpower, its largest trader, and an emerging technological rival across almost every critical field. China became the largest trading partner for most countries on Earth and built the most formidable industrial base in history. CEPR. This didn't just surprise Washington. It undermined the entire grand strategy the US had relied on for 30 years. The post-Cold War system was not designed for a China that could outproduce the United States, outbuild it in infrastructure and ships, and out-innovate it in key strategic domains. But that's exactly what happened. Here's the uncomfortable part. American policy helped this happen. Let's break that down. 1. Offshoring and the hollowing of US industry. US corporations spent decades offshoring manufacturing to China. The motivation was clear. Lower wages, fewer constraints, massive economies of scale, and access to a fast-growing market. The effect was just as clear. The US industrial base was hollowed out while China built up the capacity to manufacture almost everything. Real power in the modern world flows not from slogans or speeches, but from industrial capacity. Who makes the steel? Who builds the ships? Who manufactures the chips? Who controls the supply chains? China built the largest industrial base in human history, in some key sectors, 5 times larger than America's. In 2023, China accounted for around 28–29% of global manufacturing value added, more than the next 3 manufacturing economies combined. China Power Project. That's not a gap, that's a structural advantage. China didn't just build factories, it embedded itself at the center of critical supply chains. Electronics and smartphones, batteries and electric vehicles, solar panels and renewable energy components, rare earth elements, and a vast range of intermediate goods that other countries assemble but do not fully control. In sector after sector, all roads lead to Chinese factories. If you sanction China, you're not just targeting a country. You're hitting the factory floor of the world. That matters when you're trying to build military hardware, renewable infrastructure, or even basic consumer goods. American policy also misread China's long game. Washington assumed that global market integration would gradually transform Beijing's politics and priorities. Instead, Beijing used integration to extract technology, accumulate capital, climb up the value chain, and build a more self-reliant, state-managed model. China played the long game and played it exceptionally well. So today, when leaders in Washington talk about containing China, realism reminds us, containment works when the rival is small and fragile, not when it is already a massive, deeply integrated great power. China is not just big, it is deeply woven into the world economy. With 1.4 billion people, a global manufacturing system, and the economic mass of a genuine peer competitor. In realist terms, the United States built its own rival. As Mearsheimer has argued, this may be the greatest strategic blunder of the post-Cold War era. Now that we understand how China broke the system, we need to look at the consequences and why the United States finds itself boxed in, how China cornered the United States. Let's start with the economy because that's where China has pulled off its most decisive victory. Most people still think power comes from ideology, rhetoric, or headline military budgets. In the modern world, power flows from industrial capacity. China built an industrial machine that dominates critical supply chains, controls large shares of rare earth production, leads the world in manufacturing output, and increasingly sets the pace in high-tech exports, including electronics, telecom equipment, EVs, and batteries. CEPR. This industrial base gives China 3 huge advantages. Economic gravity. China is now the largest trading partner for an enormous swath of countries. Across Asia, much of Africa, large parts of Latin America, and even Europe, where China exports roughly twice as much to the EU as it imports in return. The Guardian. Nations follow power and opportunity. When China becomes your main buyer, main seller, or both, its preferences start to matter more than Washington speeches. That's economic gravity. Because China has the biggest industrial base, it also has the greatest ability to surge military production in a crisis. It can ramp up shipbuilding, produce missiles and drones in vast numbers, and replenish losses faster than any other country alive. The United States, with a smaller, more expensive, and often fragmented industrial base, simply cannot match that speed and volume over a long conflict. This isn't a small gap, it's a structural advantage baked into the new order. Now let's talk about the military dimension, especially at sea. While Washington spent 30 years fighting small wars in the Middle East, focusing on counterinsurgency, and cycling forces through Iraq and Afghanistan, China spent those same decades building a military designed for one overriding purpose: push the United States out of Asia. And they've succeeded far more than most American planners expected. China now has the world's largest navy by number of battle force ships, over 370 platforms and climbing toward about 395 by 2025 and 435 by 2030, according to U.S. defense assessments. It has advanced anti-ship ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons that Washington is still struggling to counter, a dense anti-access Vash area denial bubble along its coast, a zone where U.S. forces cannot easily operate without taking heavy losses. If a conflict broke out in the Western Pacific today, the United States would be fighting 10,000 kilometers from California, but only about 200 kilometers from Shanghai. That is a losing formula in pure logistics and geography. Distance matters. Supply lines matter. Industrial capacity matters. China has the home field advantage in every one of those categories. 4. Diplomacy, not alone, but embedded. China also didn't rise alone. It built strategic relationships across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and increasingly Europe. For many of these countries, China is seen not as a pure threat, but as an indispensable economic partner. The main buyer of their commodities, a key provider of infrastructure, a major source of investment and technology. Meanwhile, the United States is often seen as militarily powerful, but geographically distant, and sometimes politically inconsistent. Even long-term U.S. partners, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Brazil, South Korea, and others, are learning to play both sides, balancing between Washington and Beijing. This is how multipolarity begins, quietly, gradually, and then, in some regions, all at once. China has not only caught up, it has cornered the United States in key theaters, forcing Washington to operate on disadvantageous terms, which brings us to the core question. Why can't the United States simply turn this around? Why U.S. strategy is failing in one word. Time. China has already crossed the threshold. You cannot contain a country that has 1.4 billion people, a massive diversified economy, the world's strongest manufacturing base, a modern military, and the political will to challenge U.S. primacy. Containment works against rivals that are small, fragile, and isolated. China is none of those things. By the time Washington fully recognized the scale of the China challenge, the gap was already closed, and in some areas, reversed. Let's look at the key elements of U.S. strategy and why they're failing. The United States has sanctioned Chinese firms, blacklisted technology companies, and imposed sweeping export controls on semiconductors, chip-making tools, and AI-related technologies. Congress.gov. Do these measures hurt China? Yes. They slow down access to the most advanced cutting-edge technologies. But there are three big problems. First, China has the industrial depth to build much of what it needs over time. When the U.S. denies chips, China builds domestic alternatives, especially in mature nodes. RHG.com. Second, when you sanction the factory floor of the world, you risk disrupting supply chains that your own economy and your allies depend on. Third, half the world is not aligned with U.S. sanctions. Many countries in the global south, and even some U.S. partners, continue doing business with China because their economies depend on it. The more the U.S. pushes, the more Beijing accelerates its drive for self-sufficiency. Pressure is not slowing China's rise. In key sectors, it is speeding it up. Washington often says, alliances are America's great strength. Historically, that was true, but alliances only work if partners believe the United States can protect them, and that the cost of opposition is too high. Today, that belief is weakening. Countries like South Korea, the Philippines, and even Australia are starting to realize a harsh fact. If there is a big war with China, they become battlegrounds, not beneficiaries. Many Asian states don't want to choose sides at all. They want U.S. security and Chinese money. That combination produces strategic paralysis. From a realist perspective, this is fatal. If allies won't fully commit, alliance structures crack under stress. And we are moving toward exactly the kind of stress where that would be tested. The U.S. has spent years building bases around China, strengthening forward deployments, and trying to create a loose containment ring around the Western Pacific. But there's a brute reality. Encirclement doesn't work when your opponent is fighting in its own neighborhood and you're fighting from across an ocean. The US cannot reliably maintain escalation dominance in the Western Pacific. It cannot sustain a prolonged war 10,000 kilometers from home against a peer competitor operating just a few hundred kilometers from its own coast. It cannot easily absorb the losses required to break through China's anti-access missile and air defense umbrella. Many Pentagon war games reportedly converge on the same conclusion. Either the US loses or it wins at catastrophic cost, losing ships, bases, and lives at a scale that would shake American society and politics. In great power politics, those two outcomes, loss and catastrophic victory, start to look indistinguishable. Here's the twist. The scenario US officials fear most is not a dramatic war or a sudden financial collapse. It's something quieter, a peaceful Chinese hegemony in Asia. Imagine this: no shots fired, no invasion of neighbors, no big dramatic showdown. Instead, China dominates trade, technology, and diplomacy in Asia. Countries align with Beijing simply because it offers more markets, more investment, and fewer constraints. And one day, the United States wakes up and discovers it is no longer the central power in the most important region of the 21st century. No war, no day zero crisis, just economic gravity and a quiet transfer of influence. That scenario is more frightening than war because there's no obvious way to stop it. No clear military victory. No sanctions package that reverses it. No speech in Congress that changes the underlying structure of power. What happens next? Now that we've seen how China rose, how the US fell behind, and why every major American strategy is running into structural limits, we have to ask the final question. What does the world look like when China becomes the dominant power in Asia? Because that is where the international system is heading, and there is no simple, cost-free way to reverse it. A more competitive, more dangerous world. The first thing you'll notice is that the world becomes more competitive, more unsettled, and potentially more dangerous. Great powers do not like sharing space. They do not tolerate other great powers dominating their neighborhoods. Just as the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere, China will seek to dominate East Asia. This doesn't make China evil. It makes China normal, in a realist sense. This is how great power politics works. In this new system, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, and others will face immense pressure to align with Beijing, whether they want to or not. Power shapes choices. Over time, security, trade, and technology dependence pull states toward the stronger pole. The limits of US power projection. The United States will still be a formidable global power. Its economy will remain huge. Its military will remain lethal. But not in Asia, not in the same way. Distance matters, logistics matter, industrial capacity matters. In the long term, the US cannot project enough power 10,000 kilometers from home to consistently counter a peer competitor operating in its own backyard. Washington will talk tough, announce new strategies, unveil new alliances and frameworks, but the structural reality won't change. Asia will no longer revolve around Washington. It will revolve around Beijing. That's the core shift. From unipolarity to multipolarity. Once China dominates Asia, the international system transitions from a unipolar world dominated by the United States to a fully multipolar order. You get a world with China as the regional hegemon in Asia, the United States still dominant in the Western Hemisphere, a rising India trying to balance both, Russia acting as a strategic disruptor, Europe gradually drifting into secondary power status. This distribution of power creates instability, uncertainty, and rivalry. Historically, multipolar systems are the most war-prone because there are more great powers, more possible coalitions, and more chances for miscalculation. We are heading directly into one. Are there any options left for the United States? People often ask, is there anything the United States can still do? From a realist standpoint, there are only three meaningful options, none of them easy. First, rebuild American industry, reindustrialize, boost manufacturing, reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains. This takes decades, but without it, the US will always be fighting with a weaker material base. Second, manage deterrence carefully. A US-China war would be catastrophic for both sides, economically, militarily, and politically. Deterrence needs to focus on avoiding reckless escalation, preventing accidental conflict, while still making clear that some red lines remain. Third, adjust expectations. This is the hardest pill for Washington to swallow. For roughly 80 years, the United States has been the center of global power. Letting go of dominance is psychologically difficult. But realism teaches a painful lesson. You cannot stop the rise of another great power once it reaches critical mass. You can only adjust to it. China didn't just grow, it transformed the international system. Whether the United States likes it or not, that transformation is permanent. The unipolar moment is over. The world is reorganizing. Power is shifting east, and history is moving with it. This is not a story of good versus evil. It is a story of structure, power, and inevitability. And all of us are living through one of the most significant geopolitical transitions of the 21st century. Closing. If you want to understand the next 50 years, don't focus on speeches, press releases, or feel-good narratives. Look at power. Look at who controls manufacturing, who dominates trade, who commands the seas, who shapes technology. Because power is what shapes the world. It always has, and it always will. This is Dr. Dan's channel. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. The story of China and the United States is far from over.